Hi, my name is Miriam Bogler, and I'm the founder and CEO of Project Pulse. In this video, I'm going to show you how to implement project-based learning in Project Pulse. But before I go and delve deeper into a project from start to finish, I would like to focus on what project-based learning is. And so what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a definition that I found on the George Lucas Foundation website, where it says that project-based learning is an inquiry-based educational approach in which students explore real-world problems through individual and group projects. This teaching and learning method encourages students to make sense of why content is useful and how it might be applied. And what they relate here is something that I used to do when I was a student. Many times my teachers would teach something and I ask myself, why do I need this? How, there was no way for me to contextualize what I'm learning and why am I learning it? And so what they are trying to tell you here is that in a project-based learning situation, whether you are doing it with Project Pulse or with any other tool, you are not going to, if you are doing it right, you are not going to wonder why you're learning something, because it's going to be very clear that anything that you're learning here is necessary in order for you to solve the problem in the end. So let me just shift to the project that I wanted to discuss here. And all right. Okay, so we are going to discuss today what I planned for this training is really to show you how you start with a problem and how you develop it until you solve it in the end. So we are talking here about students, of course, how students will start with a problem and then gradually how this is being developed into a, into the solution. Now, what I mean by when I show you this is that you as a teacher can design this template for them, and then it's going to be very clear for them, what they need to do in order to work on this project. And the project that I picked is a very simple one, actually, that probably everyone can relate to. And this is what is wrong with my golden pothouse plant and how can I treat it back to life? And basically, this, everybody treated a plant or have seen a plant and know what needs to be done in order to, keep the plant healthy. And so I thought, what can be best than something as simple as this to make it clear how to design or how to do a project-based learning project. And so why am I saying project-based learning project? Because there are different types of projects. There are projects that are not project-based learning, yet they are still considered projects. For example, one of those was when I was a student, then the teacher would assign a project about, please, summarize, or not summarize, but please create a project about the planets. And so what I did is just basically learned about the planets, summarized each planet, and maybe added a few images or videos or something to it, and maybe even created a few using some, arts and crafts tools. And that was my project. It wasn't project-based learning, and you'll see in a minute why, but it still was a project. So what I'm going to teach you here, although this is done with Project Pulse, the entire project was done with Project Pulse, I'm going to teach you how to do project-based learning, not just in Project Pulse, but this is how you would do it, whether you're doing it with paper and pen, or you're doing it with a G Suite, or you're doing it with Office 365, or, the methodology behind project-based learning is going to be the same. So it's not like if you're not going to do it with Project Pulse, it's going to be easier to do or something like that. Project-based learning is not a, I would say, it's not a process that you would find easy. You know, and I'm not talking about easy that it's hard to understand how to do, because it's not. I'm talking about that you need to invest work in it. And whether you're doing it in Project Pals, or you're doing it with, as I said, with G Suites, or you're doing it with Office 365, it is the same amount of effort in order to do a real project-based learning. And this is also the situation in life. So we are just teaching our students how to, how to tackle these big problems when they step out to the working world. So, so this started with, with a problem. We are starting here with a problem. This is the first tab, and we are starting with a problem. Our class received a golden pothouse present from one of the parents. Our teacher decided to assign its care to us because she thought it was a great learning opportunity. We followed the guidelines that came with the plant, and for the first couple of months, all went well. But then we started seeing some symptoms of illness and turned to our teacher for help. She told us that we need to do some research and find out how to remedy the situation and get the pothouse back to health. So, so what we did is, of course, we decided to kind of specify what is the problem. So here are the symptoms. It says we started noticing a bunch of leaves turning yellow, and the problem became worse every day. So usually a project-based learning situation, and let me just go back for a minute into the project that I did about project-based learning, and go to the design principles, because this is important before I even go to the details. So here it tells you that the project-based learning project, it starts with an effective PBL requires purposeful and authentic experiences generated by students engaging in relevant questions. So definitely this is an authentic problem, and it is a relevant question. I mean, we all encounter these situations that we have indoor plants that we would like them to flourish, but for some reason we fail in treating them, and then they just don't go the way we want them to go. And this is a problem-solving situation, as any other problem-solving situation that you would encounter. It's not as big, but it was going to give you a good example of how to solve similar problems. And so the next step would be a main question should drive a unit of study, and that question should be feasible to consider, worthwhile, contextualized, meaningful, and ethical. So main question could also be the driving question, of course, which is much more known in PBL circles. And so it tells us here that it should be feasible, definitely feasible to do, because it's no problem to get a plant, an indoor plant. I'm sure we all encountered that before. And then worthwhile, definitely worthwhile. We love plants. They enrich our lives. Contextualize, definitely contextualize. You will see in a minute how the entire process of following up on what happens to the plant and how we can actually get it back to health requires us to understand a lot of things that without them we cannot get to the final conclusion. And meaningful, definitely meaningful. Plants help to make our, as I said, make our life more rich. And ethical, definitely ethical. So the second step definitely applies. And then these questions should be related to students' lives, definitely related. The communities in which young people reside, yes. And real world issues happening outside the classroom. Well, this is a real world issue because, we have vegetation all over, whether it's outside or inside. And so we definitely see these things happening, not just in the house, but outside the house. So yes, this is important. And then projects should feature deep integration with course content and be rooted in core subject areas, helping to deepen and build student knowledge of important topics. So you'll see in a minute when I go through the project and you see the steps, you'll understand that in order to solve the final problem, how to treat this plant so that it's not going to get, so it's going to get back to health. We actually need, the students actually need to understand a lot of other subjects, related subjects that are important, that without which they cannot proceed to the solution phase. And then quality PBL benefits from collaborative peer-to-peer interactions and trusting student-teacher relationship. Definitely you'll see, first of all, the nature of Project Pulse is, of course, it's a collaborative platform, but the projects that I'm going to show, and in general, project-based learning is a collaborative environment. And so you'll see how the students in this project are going to collaborate on actually making sure that this plant is going to have a healthy, good life. And then learning from research and relying on evidence about what works is essential. These practices include providing feedback to students. Definitely, teachers will provide feedback, creating opportunities for reflections. You will see that a real project-based learning environment is one in which students are constantly providing feedback, getting feedback from the community many times, and then taking all this into consideration to improve whatever product they are working on or whatever, you know, and then that feedback helps them improve the product, iterate on it, and try again, and get more feedback and so on. So you see that happening all the time. And empowering students to share their learning with others. Definitely in the end of the process, they will be proud to show everybody how they solve the problem. So let me just go back to the project. And as I said before, so basically our driving question in this case is, what can be done to turn the golden pothouse back to health? So this is what drives the entire project. And so, now let's see what happens in the next step. So the next steps should be, and as you see here on the top, these are the phases, different phases of the project, starting from the problem that we defined and moving on until we find the treatment and the solution. But the next step is the problem part. So what is absolutely necessary for the students to understand in order to solve this problem? And so we start by identifying those things. So the first thing would be really just knowing about, so it also says that what is absolutely essential to know in order to solve this problem. So we will start, and it shows here that this is number one, that knowing about plants and how they function. So just understanding, you know, plants, all their parts and how they function is absolutely essential, because without understanding this, we really cannot heal something that we don't know how it functions. So that's the beginning. And then we move on to the golden pothouse basic care. So we need to understand a little bit about what they tell us that we need, what is the basic care for this, for this plant. And so we are going to do some, so the students are going to do some research to find out, you know, watering, or how the watering should happen, and sun exposure, and all these things are very important in order to make sure that this plant is going to grow healthy. And then our plant care routine. So, you know, what happened here is that, you know, the kids, the students got this plant as a present from one of the parents, and the teacher decided to assign this to students, to assign the care to students. And each of them, you know, looked at the instructions that came probably from the nursery and decided to start treating. They rotated the care, so every student did it for a week. And then it's absolutely important to understand what was that care, what did they actually do, and why did, after a couple of months, did this plant start showing signs of illness. And then we need to move on to actually doing the troubleshooting. And but before we do that, we need to have some kind of a guide. You know, many times when you're trying to treat something, you actually need to know what are the different types of illnesses that can occur in a specific situation. So what we are actually going to study here, and the students are going to do research about, is what are those different types of illnesses that can happen? What are their symptoms? And based on that, the students will be able to glean out of all this information, what are the types of tests that they need to perform, because not every situation that, and every type of illness that they will see will apply. So for sure, they need to compare to the symptoms to the different types of illnesses that are out there, that are possible, in this case, and then decide which are likely, and once they know which are the likely ones, they need to start doing tests and actually treating this like they need to test each variable to see which one is the one that really affects it in a negative way. And then finally, of course, once they have some clues from these tests and the tests indicate clearly what is the problem, this is when they will start doing some analysis to make sure that really that is the problem, and then get some conclusions, and based on the conclusion, come up with some plan that's going to be a good plan for, for treating the pothouse back to health. So, so these are the parts. These are the main parts, absolutely necessary. As I said before, these are all important, and these are all adding to the knowledge base of the student. And without them, it's really going to be difficult for the students to decide what to do in the end. And so moving on from here, we are going to actually a tab where the students are going to learn everything about plants. This is the first phase that we described here in the problem parts. And this is where they will start learning, what are the roots, what is their functionality, the stem, the leaves, even photosynthesis, because that's the main tool by which the plants are generating the food that they need. And then the flower and the fruit and so on. So all these are very important parts. And so this is the first phase. As I said, this was finished with all the research in it. So everything you see here was already done by students. And then once the students know and understand exactly how plants work, they will move on to the next phase. And the next, and again, let me just give you a little bit of a clue about how this is going to be performed. So if usually these projects are done in by a team of students. So let's say that we have 3 students, the work needs to be shared. So they will decide which one will do about the root, the other one will do about the stem. And of course, they're going to talk to each other about whatever they learned, and as well as read each other's work and provide some feedback. So this is, again, collaborative work. And then moving on to the pothouse care. And here the students are going to do some research. Very simple, all they need. So first of all, learning about what is the pothouse, what is special about this plant. And then once they know that, then we move on to see what are the lighting requirements, and what are the watering requirements, and what are the fertilizer requirements. And again, as I said before, this is a collaborative project. Not everything is done by one student. Work is divided. Of course, in Project Pals, they can set up tasks for each student. So it's going to be very clear what each student needs to do, and they know that they need to do it. So there will be no doubt here about, who needs to do what. And then moving on from here, of course, as I said before, the experience was that these students took care of this plant, and they just basically followed the instructions. So it says here, we shared the task of caring for the pothouse and rotated the job between the 3 of us. Each week, 1 student was assigned to care for the pothouse. We tried to follow the nursery's guidelines below our care routines. So here are the guidelines of the nursery, and here it shows exactly the 3 students who took care of the plant. And as I said, they rotated, each student did it for a week, and they described exactly what they did. So one of them, followed the instruction that the pot was light and placed it next to the big window in the classroom, and checked the soil every day and made sure that the soil was dry, because that's what she read that it said. So I'm not going to take you through all these, of course. So each of them, if you read this, each of them had their own interpretations of these guidelines. And of course, when you have a situation like that, you know, many times it's the patient gets sick in the end. So that's what happened probably. So moving on from here, we are going to the troubleshooting part. And in here, these students, this team, needs to now come up with what are the possibilities of illnesses that they need to consider, because, you know, as a doctor, you have to know what the options are, what could be the problem here. So for the pothos, for the yellowing of leaves, so what students need to do here, of course, is to do some research about what can lead to the yellowing of the pothos leaves. And so as you see here in this mind map, you see that all these are possibilities, you know, and it tells you if these are just the old leaves, and then, you know, then so on. If this is, there could be some insect infestation. So that's what happens when there's an insect infestation, or maybe the plant is underwater, or maybe even overwatered. Both possibilities, you would not believe this, but both of them can lead to yellowing of leaves, only slightly, you know, they have additional symptoms that will indicate whether this is the first case or the second case. And then not enough light, you know, or too much light. Again, the same story. It's not enough just to check this variable. You usually have to check additional things to make sure that it is, whether it's the not enough light or the too much light, because otherwise you will not be able to distinguish. And then imbalance of nutrients. So all these can be reasons. So what the students decided to do is to create a table that they are going to, and maybe a plan, a testing plan, because that's important. Once they do a testing plan, it's much easier to determine what was the problem. Now that they know what the possibilities are here, they will be able to decide what is their case. And so they started with old leaves. So whether this is the leaves that yellowed were both old and new. So it says, well, so this situation with the old leaves is not a possibility, because the yellowing happened not just for the old leaves, but it also happened for the new leaves. So that's not likely, they decided, and therefore this is not their problem. So that's the outcome. And then insect infestation, and here are the symptoms, you know, what are the symptoms? And usually they also come with the roots that rot, and some spots on the leaf, and so on. So there's additional symptoms that come whenever there is an insect infestation. And so it says not very likely, not all leaves are affected by the yellowing, and there is no root rot or leaf spot or blight. So this is probably not the problem. So as I said before, they are going through each of them underwaters, and, you know, and it says here, so this one, in this case, it says this could be the reason for our problem, because multiple older leaves did yellow and the soil was dry when Jane took care of the pothos. So it says here, we need to test this variable separately by watering the plant and seeing the effect. So this is the underwater situation. And then moving on from here, you will see that this is also a possibility, overwatering. So we need to test. So these are all situations that they need to test. Not enough light needs to be tested, and too much light also needs to be tested. And the last one, not very likely. So what they will do in the next step, of course, they will take these 4 situations and they will actually conduct a test. And moving on from here, this is where the students will start doing planning an experiment. And so underwatering, overwatering, too much light, and not enough light. Each student in the team can take one or several of these situations and test and conduct the experiment, see what happens during the process of testing, and then what are the results. And these results will tell which of these cases is the one that's likely. And what's happening here, when they decide on the variables that they are testing, they will isolate. So they will just test one variable at a time, because if you mix it and you do too many of them together, you will not be able to distinguish what was the reason. So definitely this will take some time to test and see. And so, so in this case, the underwatering, they started watering it, more than they did before, but they did not exaggerate, because they knew that exaggerating will lead them to an overwatering situation. And then started seeing, after they remove all the yellow leaves and everything, started seeing that if new leaves were coming out, and if they did, then whether they were green or just yellowing like all the others. So they had to follow up for a while and get to some conclusion and so on. So they did all this. So let's see what were the conclusions that they were that they found. So in this last step, they are conducting the analysis and they come up with a treatment. So the water analysis. So the two situations that they actually had to test were first about water, whether this is underwatering, overwatering, and then the light, whether this is over lighting or under lighting. And so in this case, what they did, what was the care? So the care, what did Jane do? What did Jonathan do in terms of the watering? And what did Susie do? But then they started the testing. So when they did the overwatering, then it showed here we allowed the soil to dry somewhat, but not to the extreme. And we made sure to remove the yellow leaves and the rotted roots so that we can detect if new yellow leaves are forming. New leaves appeared and they were green, which was a good sign that we may have overwatered the pothouse previously. And so here the underwatered, of course, they tested that too. And you see that the differences in color, the green text positive outcomes, the red text is a negative outcome. And so when they overwatered here, in this case, then the leaves were still becoming yellow. In fact, they also got dark spots, which was an indication that we were overwatering the plant. And so, they kept doing the same test for the lighting and came to the conclusion that by moving the pothouse away from the window, it actually did not make much of a difference. So the results were more new leaves were growing and they were green, which does not necessarily mean that the problem was too much light, but that distancing the plant from the light source did not affect its normal growth. However, moving it too close to the light, actually affected in a negative way. And so what they concluded here, based on the care records, it was hard to determine which care led to the problem. Our pothouse was experiencing because each student had their own interpretations of the care instructions. However, by testing each of the likely variables, watering and lighting separately, it became clear that the pothouse suffered from overwatering and that lack of light was not the issue. In fact, moving the pothouse away from the window did not affect its normal growth. We also concluded that we need to come up with a uniform treatment regimen that each student will follow and not allow students to interpret the nursery's guidelines as they see fit. If after making all these changes, problems arise, we need to go through this analysis again and find the culprit. And so that was the conclusion. Of course, conclusion led to a treatment regimen, and this is the treatment regimen that they came up with. And so this, as you see, this is a simple problem, as I said before, in which these students had to involve understanding a lot of things that relate to the pothouse, including how plants work, and including, what is the care for the normal care for the pothouse, and what types of illnesses can affect it when its leaves are becoming yellow, and as well as understanding what was the care that these students gave to this plant, and whether it was in line with what they were, prescribed by the nursery, or whether it was a lot of interpretation that they, put into it. And of course, there was some interpretation, which in the end led to some illness. So yes, so they actually arrived at the right conclusions, including the fact that they decided that from now on they need to follow a very clear regimen of treatment that will be the same for all students, so that this plant can grow up into health. Now, what I'm showing you here is a constant phase of, of trying to, in this case, trying to solve a problem. But as they solve the problem, they need to also test, and they need to see, and then they need to iterate the test, because maybe one test failed, but then they needed to test it for the other variables. So this whole process of creating and then testing, or asking public opinion about what you create, and then getting the feedback, and then changing things based on the feedback, and then coming back to the community or to other students and asking their opinions and their feedback. This whole entire process is very typical of a real project-based learning environment. And you will see that repeated in other projects. Let me just take you to another project that is a little slightly different, but it also has that in it. And one of that project is in the Project Pulse catalog, and it's actually under our completed projects here. And it is how can we help solve homelessness? So this is a bunch of students that decided that they want to help to solve homelessness. And so they start by actually trying to understand the problem description and scope. What is the problem? So they come up with a definition, of course, they have a few guiding questions, a few images, and then they do some research and see what the problem is and what is the scope. How big is this problem? How much, what percentage of the population is affected, and who are these people who are affected, and so on. And then moving on from here, this is where they move on to actually understanding really who is the population, and who are the people who are affected by it. And so, they do some studies, they do some research about it, and so on. And then moving on from here, once they understand a lot about homelessness, they now are ready to do some research about what are the causes for homelessness. And in this case, this little mind map actually shows all the causes, but behind this, of course, there's a lot of research that students are doing in order to come up with all these, all these possibilities of that are leading to homelessness. And then from here, they say, well, okay, what can be the solutions for this? And so this is really a very visual mind map that those causes that they identified previously for homelessness are actually matched to possible or existing solutions. And so here are all the possible or existing solutions that can be that can solve the situation. But then, of course, the students need to take this big problem, which is homelessness is a very big problem, especially, in a national scale. So it's difficult for a group of students to solve such a big problem. But what they can do, they can take it locally to their to their area, wherever they live. And so what they did here is they decided to go to a place like that deals with homelessness, and to come up with different help options that they believe that are feasible in their area. And so they came up with all these options, and they even created a help plan. So based on what they learned about this local community of homeless people, they now are able to design an entire help plan. And maybe, you can even extend this project. So this project is probably not extended enough, but you can actually extend this project. And if this is a team of projects who are working on it, then one student can be in charge of one help option, the other one can be in charge of the other, and so on. And these help options can be then tested. So if you really want to be very serious about this, about the solution, and you want to come with real solutions to this community, it's a good idea to take each of these variables, which now they become variables, these help options, and test them and see which one is more effective, which one helps more the homeless community, which one had a bigger effect. And then, so what I would do is I would create a tab for each of these options and then do a test, conduct a test, and you know, in the field, whatever the test is, and then come up with the results, what happened, you know, and show what was the level of impact in this case. And then, of course, once everything is finished and they actually apply their interventions, this is where they will use these sticky notes to describe how impactful was my help. And they will describe what they did. As I said before, if they had taken each of these help options and analyzed each of them separately, then they would probably do it there. They would probably also describe to us whether it was impactful or not. They also can gather a whole, you know, like images of their help, like an involvement gallery that shows exactly what they did. So this is a very, again, in line with all those project-based, you know, project-based learning environments where you are trying to solve a problem, you are applying some intervention that you need to test, and you need to see how impactful that is. Again, this whole process of, you know, iterative involvement that leads to the best solution that they can come up with. Another project that that does follow those guidelines would be something like and this is maybe a classic. If I go to the project pause catalog and I go to the templates, we have something that's called the engineering design template. And the engineering design template is actually a typical engineering design process broken down into these tabs. And so it starts by students wanting to find out what are the pain points of a certain community. So that could be a community of students, or that could be a community of, you know, just a community in general where I live. And so they send a survey to the community and say, what are the things that you would like being fixed or being better in your community? And then the community comes up with ideas, and they look into the survey results, and based on that, the team comes up with their ideas about what they think that they should take on, what type of idea or innovation they should take on. And then they are voting on all these ideas and coming up with one idea that, and they will describe it, one that they believe is the most worthwhile developing. And they will describe it and what type of problem it solves, some execution ideas, how to do it, and then what they think that the impact will be. And once they do that, they move on and they start, now that they have an idea, now they have to find out whether there's something like this already in the market, and you know, are there similar ideas, and provide a list of that. And if there are, and what are they solving? And if, you know, maybe they are not solving everything that needs to be solved, and maybe there's a place for us to do a better, something better that is going to solve what actually the community was complaining about. So they can then come up with some, you know, a rough drawing of, you know, something like a handkerchief version of their idea, and then describe the innovation. And but again, this phase, you know, needs to go back to the community, whoever the community that is going to be impacted by it. So it needs to go, and they need to be asked, oh, so what do you think? Is this a good idea? Is this something good to solve? You know, is this a good idea to develop? And they need to get responses. Of course, they will get it in the form of a chart, and then move on to the design phase based on what they hear back from the community. And if they hear, oh, that's not a good idea, they actually need to go back to the drawing board and come up with something else, and come up with a new idea here and send it back again, until finally this is something that is probably the best idea to develop. Because if the community doesn't find it worthwhile, why would we even invest the time to do this? And then moving on to design. And this is where they will actually, once they have an idea that everybody likes and thinks that it's worthwhile developing, this is where they will use some professional CAD tools or something like that to come up with a design and even describe it, and come up with what are the criteria for success. And again, we are going into the feedback. So once we have the designs and everything, the team will weigh in about what they think, whether something needs to be fixed or made better, and so on and so forth, and maybe even send it back, send the design to the community, and send a survey and see what they think about it, and so on. Moving on from here, they will go to prototype. Once everything is accepted as good, this is where they will actually invest in prototyping the tool. And they will first decide what are the best materials for prototyping. They will come up with the different steps of how they prototype the tool, and even maybe an image of the finished prototyped product that they are doing. And then moving on from here, they will then again, we are going back to that feedback, because every step of this process needs to be checked by the team, by the community. And once they are, coming up with the best idea, the best prototype, then they can move on to the next step. And then testing, of course, this is where they will start testing, and to see how the product works. And they will do multiple of those again. And each time they will have a review by the team, by others, and so on and so forth, until finally they come up with something that satisfies everybody. Again, here comes the survey that goes out to the community to see whether they like it or not. If they don't, again, there's a revision phase. This is where they, can revise a lot of stuff. They can revise the design, they can revise the prototype. So a lot of things can be changed, and again, sent back to the community for review, and again for retesting, and so on. So you see how this process works. It's a long process. It's, as I said before in the beginning, when I said that project-based learning is not something that is as easy as 1, 2, 3. It is easy in the sense of what you need to do, because each time, you need to, it tells you what you need to actually do in each phase. But it is not easy in terms of it's a long process. It's a process that needs to be followed in order to get to the right solution in the end. Finally, let me just show you one last example like that. And the reason I'm showing you all these examples is because I want you to see how you can take the information that I gave you about plants and how you can transfer it to other things that you're working on. And so let's say that you are going to do the mathematics of paper planes. So this is an interesting project. It was not created by me. It was actually created by a teacher from Australia. And he did an amazing job. And I think that this is really an ideal project-based learning. And so he started here by basically introducing them to what project-based learning is, but also he told them what is the purpose. You will learn how to measure different shapes. You will learn about distance and time measurements, all these things that they will learn. But it tells you you will do research into shape, size, and configuration to design, create your best paper planes. You will test your paper planes to determine which is the best. You will analyze your data. So there's data here. So basically, this is a process. The process is first to learn about what are paper planes. How can you make paper planes the best there are, so that they will go the further as they can, and also they will go the faster as they can. So the fastest as they can. So basically, once you learn all that, then you can start thinking about, okay, so how do I design the best paper plane? And then they go into the design considerations. Once they have the design, you will start testing it. And once you test it, you see, oh, how much distance, what was the distance that it made, or how fast did it do it, and so on. And so, so all these phases are here, are actually recorded here that they will do. And these phases are reflections of what I told you. So they start by actually doing that research that I was telling you about generally about paper planes and what are the best ones. And then moving on from here, they will start doing some observations about, things that will design you, the things that will help in the design and so on. So these observations are important. Once they have these two tabs, when they have information about these, then they can go in here and start actually doing their own, because now they have information on what is the best, best design for their paper planes. And as I said before, again, these are variables that they are testing. So they even, it's even put in the context of a scientific investigation where you have to identify the independent and dependent variables and so on, and materials, so on, so basic, and finally the building process. And then this is where they move on. Once they built it, they move on into actually describing how they built it, the steps of building it, and testing it. Now testing it, what they need to do here is basically the length in meters, how long, how far they traveled, and the time in seconds that it took, how long the flight took. And then this is where they will do some analysis. They will use a spreadsheet to type that data up and even come up with a chart of, of the speed. And finally here, they will now come up with problems they encountered and, what is the critique and the solution for that. In the end, they will come up with some conclusions. And this is where they can show their different styles of, how their paper plane, and show exactly what type of improvements they think they need to make in order to make it even better than before. So here are conclusions. Here is some, all kinds of critique about what happened, and final decision, and even, deciding whether they think that they can be champions in a competition. So again, same story, testing, and based on the testing and, making improvements and so on. So this is, so thank you very much. I hope that this helped you understand how you can implement project-based learning in Project Pulse, but really we were actually mainly discussing the methodology of project-based learning, because whether you do it in Project Pulse or you do it with any other tool, the process is the same. The big difference in Project Pulse is that, let's say, if you are doing it in G Suite or you're doing it in Office 365, team members are working in separate files, and it's very difficult to see the big picture. But in Project Pulse, you see everything in one place. You have everything here. All the phases of a project are here. There is real-time collaboration, so you see what other team members are contributing in real time. Therefore, you are never clueless as far as what is happening in the project and what type of information the team still needs and how you can help out the situation and so on. So thank you very much, and I hope that this helped. And please, we'll be happy to get your feedback, and see you in my next video.